You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Laurel Tague.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up the spine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. Don't wanna be inside the dark. Live within a question mark. Are they a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know.
Welcome back, everybody, to Epic Voyages Radio here on Inception Radio Network. I am your host this evening, Laurel Tague, and remember that we are rebroadcast on Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific on Dark Matter Radio Network. Be sure to check out our website, epicvoyagers.com, and also our YouTube channel where we have several hundred hours of archive video and audio there, all sorts of speakers and presentations. Our Facebook page, we're on Twitter now, and we're also on Instagram, so look around for us and you'll find us. Tonight we have Bruce Fenton, one of our new guest hosts, joining us, and we're going to have a fascinating discussion. I think a lot of you who are interested in some of the new research that's coming out of digs and excavations around the world are going to find tonight's show really interesting. Bruce has been involved in two very recent, very intensive research efforts, one in Ecuador, and the other on the other side of the world, literally, in the Republic of Georgia. And tonight we're going to talk about both of those, including a book he's working on that I believe is going to be released sometime in the next 5 or 6 months, called Ecuador's Lost City of Giants and the Forgotten Exodus from Mu. Now, that is a working title, so let's not hold him to that, but you sort of get the idea of the topics in that book, and I can't wait to read that, Bruce. Let me tell you a little bit about their website. If I do have some pictures tonight I'm going to post in the chat room, but make sure that you check out their website, Earth for All, EARTH, the number 4, ALL, earthforall.net. Bruce has been keeping up his research and his travels there. I believe he's got links to some videos, and you just never know what you're going to find there. I also know, we'll ask him about this, but I know he writes for messagetoeagle.com, and I believe he's also writing for Ancient Origins online now, another online newsletter. So be sure to look for him on both of those venues also. Let me just tell you a little bit about the two topics tonight, and we're going to dive right into it. Bruce and Daniela, his wife, live in Ecuador. I think right now they're living pretty close to the coast, and they're getting ready to move back up into the higher elevations near the site that he's been researching for a couple of years, near I think it's Ambato. We'll ask Bruce to correct me in a little bit. This is the most difficult of circumstances to do overland travel and any kind of, I hate to use this word, but boots on the ground research. It's the least hospitable weather and conditions you can imagine. They literally have to hack their way through a dense jungle by hand using machetes, a small number of guys, and they are looking for the remains of a yet undiscovered city which rivals those of the Maya and the Inca. And we do have some photographs that we're going to put up in the chat room. They're also on the website earthforall.net of the stonework, and it's pretty obvious that it is not naturally occurring masonry. Then the other topic we're going to do next hour, Bruce has recently been called into the Republic of Georgia over in Northeast Asia near the Black Sea, where a farmer, just a herdsman, accidentally literally stumbled upon an ancient stone crypt somewhere up in the mountains in the Lesser Caucasus. And what did he find there but two giant-sized human skeletons sitting across from each other on chairs at a large table, the chairs and the table made out of stonework. And so I believe, and Bruce is going to tell us a little bit more about this next hour, I believe that there is a plan for a Discovery Channel documentary on this area, this location, and specifically looking at the digs. I've got some pictures of some of those bones to show you in the chat room tonight. So don't go away. You're in for a really fascinating 2 hours here with Bruce Fenton. And with that, Bruce, I am asking you to speak up and say hi to everybody.
Hello, I am here. Yeah, and thank you for the great introduction. Much appreciated. So we've had quite a lot going on, and as you say, sort of in the midst of a move, which is always, problematic and sort of stressful. But we are getting that sort of organized.
And where are you right now? Tell us the city you're in right now in Ecuador.
We're in Bahia de Caracas, which is on the Pacific coast. If people know Ecuador a little bit, it's about an hour north of the city of Manta, which is probably used to be a US base there, so some might know that. And
you are moving back up into the higher elevation, right?
We are, yes. We're moving though to Cuenca, which is it's further to the south than Ambato. Best known for the artifacts found in the Father Crespi collection. Mm-hmm. So I think probably anyone looking at Ecuador will know that city. We're actually moving a bit further south. But again, yes, moving up into the highlands again.
Okay. So I'm trying to stifle a cough right now. Those of you who were looking for our show last week, I had to cancel because I got bronchitis and pneumonia, and I'm still getting over the cough. So if I cut out on you guys, you'll know I'm coming back. And I am armed to the gills here with cough drops tonight. So, well, Bruce,
understandable.
Did I oversell the terrain that you're having to wade through to do this research in Ecuador?
No, I mean, it's a really difficult place to get into. I mean, I guess that's why it's kind of survived relatively untouched until present. It's just that the whole area is kind of swamps and marshes, as well as, of course, jungle. But it's very difficult to kind of hike in there, especially from, the greater part of the year when you've got heavy rains there. So it's, I think that's partly why the government haven't wanted to go in and fully investigate is the difficulty of working in that area, as well as perhaps some other reasons, not wanting to be involved with it because of its age. But I do suspect that, there's a number of probably institutions that might have been interested that just look at the terrain and, don't really fancy wading through swamps and trying to carry equipment into there. It is pretty difficult, to be honest. It's you can't really I couldn't even really see that you could easily ride a horse in or anything. It's difficult to see what you could do there. Possibly a helicopter. You'd have to find, a nice flat area for landings, and obviously with that swamp in it. It's very inhospitable.
Well, the idea I get from your photographs there on your website is that if you did find a place to land a helicopter and safely land it, you'd still be in for quite a trek through some absolutely just like walking through brambles kinds of overgrowth. I don't know how you would do it. You can't even really take ATF, is that what you call it? ATF, the all-terrain vehicles, ATVs. You can't even get them in there, can you?
No, you wouldn't be able to, because I mean, there's areas where you have to, cross next to sort of drops where you've got a very thin ledge. You've got to walk across. So there are parts where only only human feet can take you. So yeah, it'd be difficult. There's places where yes, you might be able to use vehicles or you might be able to use horses. There's other parts you couldn't. So there's no sort of one solution that answers everything. And yeah, again, the helicopter, even if you could land somewhere nearby, you still have to enter into the jungle. So and even then, there's a huge sort of horrendous kind of steep path, like a mud chute, to get down to the site, even once you enter the jungle. So it is difficult. It is difficult. And to sort of then carry any sort of, equipment down this sort of mud chute slide type path, it would be pretty horrendous. I mean, you're pretty limited to just, what you can carry in a backpack, really.
How large has your team been that has gone in there, and how many times have you been in there now?
Well, I've been fortunate in that we've worked with a couple of different groups. So, I mean, I've been able to evade having to keep going in myself by sort of, sharing research, with others. There's a chap from the US, Benoit, who went in there with a local group of explorers that, they work with drone archaeology techniques, and they'd gone in there to sort of test a drone, and they took a lot of images, and they did, some pretty good initial research. So they sort of were happy to kind of, share their thoughts and findings. And the original discoverers, if you like, or rediscoverers, we managed to sort of track down some of them, and we interviewed some of them, and others shared information through Facebook or email. So combining both those sort of parties, then plus obviously my own expedition into there, it's included I suppose quite a number of people, probably well, I guess you're getting on towards involvement of 10 to 15 different people, that I would have to sort of credit for that. Plus, of course, Daniella's been, very helpful in that, a lot of this is, of course, is in Spanish, all the research side of it. So, she's had to do an awful lot of the actual interviewing and the, reading up on the area. So, one thing you do find is that, information about Ecuador, sort of history and archaeology, there's quite a bit of it that's not really readily available in English. So that's been another aspect. And we did meet with the government as well, the department responsible for archaeology. And so, I mean, there's been that side of it as well. So yeah, it's involved, certainly discussing with a quite a large number of people.
Well, you mentioned the government. Is there some sort of a federal agency there that's interested in pursuing this?
Well, the Ministry of Patrimony should be the government body that would deal with this. I mean, certainly they are given the task of exploring archaeological sites, investigating them and protecting them. So, I mean, naturally it falls under their remit, and they're sort of a division of the Ministry of Culture, which I suppose is a similar setup in, many countries. They'll have a kind of a Ministry of Culture, and then, an offshoot which deals with the older sort of cultural history. But for one reason or another, they haven't really done very much. And we were, I guess you could say we were given a bit of a runaround because, in the initial stages, something we hadn't really grasped was that one of the chaps that had gone with the original team, we thought he was some kind of judge, that he was, I don't know where we'd got this from. We'd been told he was some sort of, a high court judge or something like that. And the group had told us, that they had reported this, this site to the government, to the Ministry of Patrimony. The Ministry of Patrimony hadn't done anything. Later on when we met with the Ministry of Patrimony, they said they hadn't been made aware of it, and that that we were the first ones to tell them, and that nobody else had come forward, which was all very strange. But what made it most strange was that this chap that we thought was a judge, it later became clear he was actually a biologist for the Ministry of Patrimony and the Ministry of Culture, and that he had accompanied the team as their kind of a monitor when they had reported the site. And yet when we went in to report the site, they said that they'd never heard of it. But an employee of the ministry had been there and had seen artifacts. So that obviously raises a red flag. So we don't really know what it is that they, that there's a problem with, why they don't want to get involved. They certainly did know about the site, for a long period. And it was only, I think, after we went there and met with them, that they had to put on a face of that they were going to do something, because we come via a senior contact who had sort of got us this meeting, and and he had been senior in the Ministry of Culture, and so they had to kind of meet us, and they had to, I suppose they felt they had to put on a bit of a show, if you like, because of who had sent us there. Otherwise, I guess we would have got the same closed door in our faces that the initial discoverers got. So it's a bit of a strange, background story to the government's involvement, and we still don't know the ins and outs of why they haven't just simply gone in there and fully explored. I mean, they did send in a team after we did this meeting, but again, all it came out with was that there was nothing to see there, and that people should stop talking about it.
Well, I can easily construct an idea that it may have something to do with financing any sort of research to go on, and they may be biding their time until some private patron comes in and says, hey, I've got some money I want to throw at this. Are you guys willing to let me in?
Quite possibly. I mean, I know that I'd say sort of Central America, Latin America, in general, are notorious for that. Because in Mexico, you have sites, vast Mayan sites where the larger proportion are still in the jungles and unexplored. Yet the government, of course, and local people would know about those sites, but they do not want to spend that kind of money of clearing an enormous city, and investigating every temple and house. So they often will just clear enough for tourism or for some basic research purposes, and then leave the rest. So I think financing definitely comes into play. I think that's I've heard the same stories from places like Brazil and elsewhere that they can't be bothered to preserve sites and stuff because it's so expensive and so difficult to do, and so they sort of cherry pick where they're going to invest that money. So yeah, I think that's certainly, if you to take a non-conspiratorial view, I'd say that's the most likely answer. And then, of course, it's just, as to whether there's anything more sinister, we can only sort of speculate. Finances, I think, is always going to be certainly a key issue, isn't it? That there's going to be someone looking at the books and saying, do we want to spend this amount on going into a jungle and clearing and.
Well, you mentioned the size of any of these kinds of excavations, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that in a second, but someone in the chat room is wondering if any sort of giant skeletal remains have been found in Ecuador, and my understanding is that right now what you found is pretty much masonry and what appears to be foundations of what could be a pyramid. Is that right? But no bones. You found some tools.
Yeah, no bones. It's been artifacts and stone construction.
That doesn't mean there's not bones there.
No, because when you put into the account that it's in jungle, and we all know sort of how rapidly anything that's dropped in a jungle will disappear into the undergrowth and into the rotted trees and bracken, that over even a century or so, you'd expect a bone to be under the soil. So I mean, it's and if we're talking about several millennia, more likely in this case, but I'd probably say many millennia, that bones would either have completely decayed, or they'll be fossilized, or they're just simply hidden under the ground. It is really difficult to say. I mean, the conditions there probably aren't good for preserving any kind of like bones or any sort of biological material.
Very acidic, I would think.
Yeah, I would imagine things would be eaten away into the soil, fairly quickly in that, heavy sort of acidic rain type environment with, constant downpours near a volcano. So you're going to have a fairly acidic rain coming down fairly regularly. And then, it's just not ideal conditions for preserving bones. So in a way, I'd be surprised if you found the bones. I mean, if they're there and you find them, it'll probably be beneath some construction, that it's either in a tomb or it's somehow covered by a block, or there was some reason why it was preserved. I'd be very surprised if someone just finds one in the jungle nearby, I mean, in those conditions. But that's not to say that, that they're not there. That, again, I mean, people are able to do a full expedition, going in and removing blocks from the wall, etc. There may well be a cavity with a burial in it, that is completely possible. Bones have been found in Ecuador, though. I should clarify that, though. Although they haven't been found at that site, giant-sized bones have been found in Ecuador, just to sort of clarify that.
Well, and again, I'll say they haven't been found there yet, because this is really something that hasn't been studied at all, what you could describe as thoroughly yet. I mean, not even the photographs, probably. There's not that great a body of evidence yet on it. It's fairly new, right?
Yes, that's right, and it would take, bringing in, say, a geologist, an anthropologist, an archaeologist, local historian, and those kind of people to look at the site themselves and compare notes and to, and have tests done on, artifacts and such before really, anything near a conclusive opinion of the site could be reached. I mean, so all of that is kind of lacking. What we've been able to go on is really from interested amateurs, I suppose, or people like myself, or the other sort of explorers who, none of which necessarily have the degrees that would convince the public or academia of what's there and what it is. So it's unfortunate at the moment that there isn't that that other side where you have the academics come in and have a look. So yeah, we're having to do our best without them until they're willing to get involved.
I just put up in the chat room, Bruce, one of your photographs, and this is of the stone wall. Is it Yanganatis or Yanganatis? Is that the name of the specific?
Yanganatis.
Yanganatis. And this is a wall of stones about 3 hours into the jungle, not too far from Ambato. I remember in your accounts of this on your website, you were saying that the joins between these stones are very similar to the ones at Sacsayhuaman at the Peru fortress. Can you say a little more about that?
Yes, that's right. I mean, when you sort of look for a comparison around the world, to this type of stonework, you find that Peru is the, particularly, I suppose, Cuzco, Peru is where you'll find the closest matches. The walls of the fortress at Sacsayhuaman and I think it's Huayatambo and a couple of the other sites there, they seem to have very similar polygonal blocks, i.e., multi-faced blocks of a large size. But I suppose the key difference being that many of the sites in Peru, you find there's no mortar, whereas the site here, it appeared to me that there was some kind of mortar. Again, that would need to be tested just to see it really is truly a mortar, but that would be the key difference. But in terms of the shaping of the blocks and the way they're fitted, then yes, they are very similar to those sites in Cuzco. And I know some people might say on the face of it, well, it's quite near Peru, in a way, because we're in Ecuador, it's the next country, but there's still a pretty vast distance. If anyone looks at a map between the Yanganatis down to Cuzco, it is a fairly vast distance. So although Ecuador, it fell under the Inca Empire at one point, we were talking about quite a way from those other structures. So that in itself is kind of mysterious that you'll find the similar blockwork so far to the north of them. But yeah, it's definitely, I would say, related to those sites.
In terms of what's known right now about the kinds of cultures that were in that part of South America way back, do you have any idea or any kind of hypothesis for which one of the cultures might be connected with this building?
Yes, I do. I mean, I had to look at the most rational and reasonable first, which was the claim that this was just an Inca site, because the Inca were the major power, in the ancient world here. Certainly in terms of large buildings, most of them are ascribed to the Inca. So you have to start off and say, well, okay, did the Inca build this? What's the likelihood? And when you look at that, you've got to take into account firstly that although the Inca were in Ecuador, that they only had a presence in Ecuador for about 50 years before the Spanish, destroyed their empire. So, and within that 50 years, they had two major centers here, Quito and then Cuenca. And they were actually sort of split between rulerships between two brothers, and so there was actually some warring between the two. But the focus is within those areas, and any major construction projects, as you can imagine, would be near to those areas. There was no particular significance to their empire, this area of Yanganatis, other than that there was some gold mining activities there. You would not expect them to go marching into that jungle and build what would be the most difficult and complex Inca building, in the whole of Ecuador, in a site which is of no value to them. So in that way, straight away, it raises that flag that it seems incredibly unlikely that the Inca would, build a flagship type, construction in the middle of nowhere instead of in Quito or Cuenca. So it doesn't make sense. And then on top of that, you look at the typical Inca construction, the ones that we know are Inca, and most of these use very small blocks. And this is an argument that I think many people who look into this, ascribing of constructions to the Inca in Peru will notice that very, definitely Inca buildings usually use small stone blocks, as you'd expect with their technology, which was essentially small pebbles being used as hammers. So, I mean, the other ones with the large blocks are really mysterious. In fact, it's not true to say these are Inca constructions. So, in some ways, you could say this site here is helping to take the lid off this kind of cover-up, if you like, in Peru, that is ascribing all of these sites to the Inca, because now we have another similar site that can't easily be ascribed to the Inca because they have no major presence in the area where you find this building.
And is there some previous culture that you know of that is at least a candidate? I'm not trying to pin you down on who, but is there another culture that's far previous to the Inca that it could be?
Yes, I mean, as I say, I've done my best by starting with the rational, but yeah, we discount the Inca. The Panzaleo, a local Neolithic group, we can discount them. I've seen Panzaleo artifacts, I've held Panzaleo artifacts. They're nothing like the artifacts that are on the site, and the Panzaleo aren't known to do anything more than build a few mounds. They weren't a mega constructions kind of culture. So you can discount them. And then that leaves pretty much a mystery at first, because you say, well, okay, if you haven't got the Inca, you haven't got the Panzaleo, who else would be around there? And this is when you have to go really far back, and you find that there is a culture, well, an entire race, if you like, that has existed in the Americas, going back to, well, we know that they were in the Americas at least 50, 60,000 years ago. And these are a group of people that seem to originate in Southeast Asia and Australia, remains of which have been found in Brazil and also in Argentina and Chile, and I think dotted around other parts of South America. So we know that these people were there, and we have a link from the site in Ecuador going to these people, if you like, in that not far from the actual construction, about, as I understand it, probably about 10 kilometers away, there's a cave. And in that cave, back in I get this right, I think it was about 1917, I might have this a little bit wrong, but certainly, going back to the early part of last century, that there was an archaeological dig there where they found quite a number of skulls and skeletons and some artifacts. And these have been ascribed to this culture. They said these were a Brazilian type people, and they linked them to a specific region of Brazil, Lagoa Santa. And the Lagoa Santa people are these mysterious kind of, Southeast Asian, Australian people, very much like Australian Aborigines.
Interesting.
And they found that, you find this strange link that they say there that in this cave, the bones found there were of the Lagoa Santa type. And this directly links them straight to Brazil. And the Lagoa Santa site has remains of the oldest human skeleton found in the Americas so far, which they call, I think it's Evita or something. It's like a proto-Eve type for the Latin America. I think it's Evita or something they call it. But again, you find that this culture, although the bones only take you back so far, that they found charcoal remains and artifacts in Brazil which take you back more to 50,000 and possibly 60,000 years ago. So these people seem to be the best fit, because you find that they are so near to where this site is, and that we know that they were there way before anyone else, and that this site is sitting in an area that is now dense jungle, uninhabitable. But we know that if you look far enough back, the Amazon jungle just was not there. It was, what is today the Amazon jungle was mostly savannas, like you see in Africa.
Wow.
So plains and savannas. So I mean, people often don't really realize. I didn't realize this until I researched it. And then you start to find that about going back towards the end of the last ice age, that the Amazon jungle sort of regrew. But there's been large periods of time where most of it didn't exist. So you could have easily had a construction project on this land, but at a point when there was no Amazon jungle there. And so this takes you quite far back, beyond known cultures, and into that range that only these Lagoa Santa people would have been around.
Well, what I'd like to do now is I want to talk about the scale or the size of what you have found. And I was watching a show over the weekend that was in Mexico, in the Yucatan, and they were looking at Chichen Itza and some other site that's not as well-traveled as Chichen Itza. And what you have found, if I'm quoting you pretty accurately here on what you had on your website. You have perfectly cut straight edges that look to be 4 90-degree angles to exposed sides, and there appear to be 4 equal walls of equal height and width that could be representing a pyramid. Now talk about the size of this thing.
Okay, I mean, yeah, so initially we were given reports that led us to suspect it was a pyramid, and that's why I still have on the website, so I've kept things in place. But I would say that it's not a pyramid. I think that what this is, well, there's two possible, but I think essentially what you're looking at is a very large protective wall. That's the most likely at this point, I'd say, is that this is part of a much longer and much larger construction that is currently still covered by jungle. And that, in fact, that this wall may well go on for quite a large distance. I mean, now, to say quite large, I'm not sure how big. I know that one of the explorers who has gone some distance further into the jungle found another section, the same angle, the same kind of construction, and this leads me to believe that this is an immensely long wall, and that, you know, you have to then ask yourself, you know, what did they need it for? You know, what would they protect themselves against? So it starts going into another mystery. But I'd rather than saying a pyramid, I would definitely say at this point that we suspect it's a very long and very large protective wall with an extremely steep angle on it that would allow you to defend yourself from somebody. So that obviously enters into another area of the research as to protect yourself from whom. So, but yeah, the pyramid idea, yeah, I think we can safely discount. I'd say that, yeah, it's something else. But as to whether there are pyramids beyond the wall, now that's another question, because I have been told that at least one chap who owned land near to there is aware of an entrance, that he believes there's an entrance going through the wall, and he was hoping for us to sort of go in with him, but I haven't been able to do that as yet. It's sort of an easier said than done thing in a way, because I have to make all sorts of arrangements to be able to actually just go with him off into the jungle and whatnot. It just hasn't been able to happen just yet. But he's sort of fairly convinced that he's seen an entrance at one point. So in there somewhere, we suspect are the remains of the actual, you know, the town or city, which would be the actual buildings. And what we're seeing now then is just the edge of the site, along with the artifacts and tools, and that some of these may have been remnants from the construction project, or others may be weapons of some sort, you know, which were used in defending this wall. So it's become, there's always mystery on mystery with it, because of course this opens that question of, you know, who could you be, you know, fighting against? If you, let's say it's the Lagoa Santa people, and that you're the first humans in the Americas, you know, why do you need this immense wall to defend yourself? It's a kind of perplexing question, and that's where, in a way, it's kind of led into the idea of, you know, well, it's not the idea, but it's led me to look at whether or not they had some kind of conflict with an existing group, and that these may be the giants, rather than that the builders are the giants, that what they are constructing this wall for is to keep out these beings that in the local, you know, mythology, and certainly in the legends and tales, are extremely aggressive, dangerous beings that, you know, that once the natives who came into North America encountered them, they found themselves in all-out warfare with these beings. And it seems, looking at Ecuador with the finds of giant bones along the coast and in other areas, that these giants may well have already been here when the Lagoa Santa people arrived. And at this point, I'm sort of suspecting that what we're seeing here is a defensive structure, you know, against these beings, and that this is why we're also finding objects there which are of giant size, such as the giant hammers, but alongside much smaller artifacts which would be used by, you know, normal-sized humans. So it suggests there was at least some kind of encounter between two different groups, you know, of normal size and others of a much larger size. When you say giants, I would suspect, you know, from the finds that have been made, you're talking about people of around 2.5 meters, something along that lines.
So
not
8.5 feet, something like that.
Yeah, going up towards that. That, you know, that you're going to have these people that are, you know, I guess typical humans who would probably been in that time, maybe 5 to 6 foot. Maybe some of them a little bit taller, you know, and then versus, you know, this other group who, you know, are averaging more to the 7 to 9 feet, you know, range, and that, you know, the bones that have been found along the coast in Ecuador seem to validate that. I mean, I guess 2.5 meters is about the average from the finds that have been made in Ecuador and in other places as well, where giants have been found, of course. So yeah, it's kind of obviously a lot more has to be done, of course, to prove that. But the fact that you have those artifacts of the very different sizes in a similar location and the style of this wall do suggest that there may have been some kind of violent incursion there. And again, looking at Sacsayhuamán, if you go to Peru, I mean, you look at the fortress there. I mean, this was built to withstand some colossal force, and you wonder, well, who? The Inca certainly wouldn't have needed to build something like that. And apart from anything else, the Inca were, generally victorious since, everywhere they went into. So they really had no need to build, a colossal fortress with blocks of, 100-ton blocks and things in place. It doesn't make sense when you're the conquering power that you need to be so scared, So at some point, somebody, in this continent was terrified enough that they began construction projects which used immense stones that could withstand, not only earthquake stuff, but would be able to repel almost any conceivable attack. And this is really where it sort of becomes interesting in a way that, you start to look at these sites with a different eye and think, well, what if these plains people had eventually come into contact with these giants and were forced to use their superior stoneworking knowledge, which again I'll go into a little bit more in that I would say they've had a very long time to develop that, but they've used this to repel the opposing force, whereas the other side has the I guess the superior ferocity, maybe more of a focus on weapons and is a militaristic kind of culture, and the others are more defensive, just simply trying to survive against them, and that would appear to be just looking at what we have at the moment to be a conceivably real scenario. And again, I'm relying partly on what we hear from the North Americans, the native Indians there, who say that they came in and they encountered these giants and that they eventually had to form a sort of ragtag coalition of incoming tribes who, went into a full-scale war with the giants and essentially eradicated them. But that they tell us that these were immense beings, very ferocious, and in some cases were eating human flesh, and that they, that to them this is a real history. And as much as that, today there's an arrogance, where people say, it's all mythology, it's all made up. Oral history generally is kept to a very high standard in that the leader or the shaman expects the student to remember every word perfect of that history. So I mean, again, we can't simply say that they've made this all up. It goes against their cultural sort of history.
Right. Let me jump in here real quick, and
Sure.
for people who didn't start out with us at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, we're talking with Bruce Fenton here. Right now, we're talking about some firsthand expeditions that he's been on in Ecuador, up in the jungles at high elevation, and they have found what Bruce, what these look to me. They remind me of the Bosnian pyramid photographs that I have seen from Dr. Sam Osmanagic over there. The way the stones are fitting together look very similar to that. So it could be that you have found a wall, and it could be that on the other side of that wall, you may actually find something like ziggurats or pyramids.
Yes.
But the other thing I wanted to tell you was I put a couple of pictures up in the chat room of the sample of that stone hammer that you found. And one of the pictures has, I guess, you holding it, and it's all you can do to get your hand underneath it, and you can't quite put your hand all the way around the shaft of it. So that's enormous. How heavy was that thing?
Oh, that's not actually me holding it. That's Manuel Vieira, that would be, who's especially the initial researcher, really, who had tried to follow up on a very old picture of the site and led the first expedition in there that rediscovered it. So, unfortunately it wasn't me. But I mean, yes, certainly it looks like an enormous piece. And it's one of the pieces that I understand that was later stolen by, unknown group that went in, and a lot of artifacts were taken. And from what I've heard, it was being sold in the black market in Quito or something for $1 million or something. So I believe it's probably somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised by now if it's not in the US somewhere, probably in a private collection. If I had to make a wild guess, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh my goodness, that's terrible.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if it turns up in a museum one day, in some little back collection of some big museum. But I think, it's been, I believe, sold off to somebody, along with other large artifacts. I understand that there was a very large mortar and pestle of giant size, and that these also sort of disappeared, and some other very large objects. I think the larger objects are the ones that have been the focus of theft, and that the ones of normal size, I'm sure people have picked some up, that other people have gone in there, may well have taken some. But I think the focus in terms of professional theft was on the large size objects.
I've got a couple of really interesting questions here from the chat room before I start asking you about the possibility of panning for gold, and I'm not going to put the picture up yet of the large stone with a circular indentation in it, but let me ask you these questions real quick. Did you experience any GPS or cell phone interference or issues when you were standing close to these megalithic walls and ruins that you found?
I didn't really have the chance to do it. I didn't actually have a GPS device with me or anything. So it was one of the things I would have loved to have had, but with my situation being sort of zero funding and, actually, to be honest, I could only go because the researcher, L.A. Marzulli, actually sent me enough to be able to actually go to the site and to pay the guide and stuff to get there, to get some photos. So I was really, really on a limited budget. I was, working part-time as an English teacher in Ecuador on, like $3 or something. So people sort of put into perspective. Yeah, there was a lot of things I would have liked to have done, and a lot of equipment I would have loved to have had, even basic things. Even a compass, I couldn't actually afford to buy a compass. It was at a point where I really had no funds to do anything. He literally just funded me enough that I could go there and get some photos. So that was kind of, if you like, a bit of a lifesaver in that. Otherwise, I think I wouldn't have been able to do anything. So I've been greatly hampered by the lack of funds, would be the
Well, we're certainly not going to fault you for that, and thank you, L.A. Marzulli, for donating a little bit to the cause here. Back to the Bosnian pyramids, I'll mention that they have found some serious magnetic anomalies there. So when you do wind up getting the proper funding and going back to do some actual data collection, keep in mind that you may want to look at the electromagnetic fields in the areas right next to them and then further away and see what you find there.
I'd love to be able to do that.
Question number 2. This is from Neutron in the chat room. We may need him to give me a little more detail on this. He's asking, did you find any names related to the 2 brothers who ruled and fought each other 50,000 years ago? Now, maybe I wasn't listening real carefully. Did you mention 2 different leaders that were fighting?
I was talking about in reference to the Inca when I mentioned that.
Oh, okay, right.
So I'm not sure if he's obviously talking about something much further back.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where he's talking specifically, whether or not this is to do with the Anunnaki and the war between Enki and his brother. I'm not sure if that's perhaps is what he's erring towards, I guess, is because certainly there's evidence that's coming out in Peru and stuff that there was, there's a tie-in with the story of the Anunnaki and these brothers that were basically in disagreement over the fate of mankind, who supposedly we were their offspring, I suppose, that they'd made us, through genetic experiments, and then later there's this, this sort of war between them. I'm assuming that that's what he's talking about. And I haven't found anything that links it with this site, but yeah, I am aware that in Peru there's been, finds where people are saying that it seems to suggest a connection to this Anunnaki story. And, and again, I do in the book, I'm working on, it does go into the Anunnaki side of it because, I do suspect that they are part of this story, but
wonderful.
I don't actually agree with what you might say is the current consensus view in the non-academia, which is, because of course in academia there's only a very sort of matter-of-fact kind of boring tale of there's just these kings and that it's all perfectly normal and there's nothing weird in the story at all. But of course then there's the flip side, which is that these are aliens that came to Earth and that made us into slaves to mine gold. Obviously that's the other view. My perspective is somewhere in the middle, actually. I would say that I think that Sitchin, who seems to be, quoted as the source of most of the alternative views on the Anunnaki, I think that, he was wrong. And I think that at some point we have to accept that we can't say that every single scholar who's ever worked on those texts was in a big conspiracy. I don't really buy that, because then we'd have to say the same for Egypt and for basically every other culture. It seems a bit of a pick and choose, that we're willing to believe academics in other language translations, but that we won't accept that the Sumerian translations they've done are correct. And so I just don't think that we can say that this one guy got it right and all of the others who've ever looked at it have got it completely wrong. But I do think that we see in there a story that does tie in here. I think that these Anunnaki were very much Earth-based humans, but were from a lost civilization, and that they are, our forebears who left us the knowledge, and who probably they did meddle with DNA, and so it's quite possible. But these were not people arriving in spaceships; that they were already here and have come from a more advanced culture, and would appear like gods. Put it that way, and that's my take on it. So if we're talking about that war between those brothers, then yeah, I mean I am interested in that angle, but yeah, I just see it slightly differently.
The chat room is going crazy, going, yes, that's what we're talking about, including Neutron, who asked the question. So you hit it out of the ballpark there with your answer.
Excellent.
Okay, let's talk then about goals, since we're talking about Inky and the Anunnaki. What have you found on this this excavation, this expedition you've been on, that suggests to you perhaps there was gold panning? And I'm going to throw in the chat room that photograph of the flat rock with the hole in it that you suggest could be used for panning gold. And this is close to like rivers and streams, right?
Yeah, that's right. And firstly, keep in mind as well that we said earlier the Inca went into the Anunnakis only to mine gold. So we know there was gold in that area. And then on top of that, you have along these what are now fairly small streams. They do get fairly large when the rains come, but they're fairly small streams. That there are these strange stone bowl type objects, and there's quite a number, in different styles, but there are quite a number of, say, boulders and rocks that have been carved to either have a bowl part in them or they're entirely like a bowl, and that these seem to be only near to the areas with the water. There's so far none were found, as I understand it, just cast aside in the jungle. They all seem to be in place either in the water or near to the water. The most logical function seems to be panning for gold. I mean, I can't see what else these bowls really were for, why they would need to be near the water. They don't seem large enough to do anything else with them, to like keep fish in or anything else sort of more, I don't know. I just can't, I haven't been able to see sort of another use for them, put it that way. And that we know that these areas, did have gold, certainly that there would still probably be some amount of gold in those rivers. But in the end, the Incas sort of moved towards mining. But there was certainly panned gold from the rivers in the Anganatis as well as mines. So it does suggest that at some point there were people connected with this culture or near to them that were panning gold. And of course that does suggest a possible tie-in with the story of an ancient civilization that was utilizing gold for something.
Let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. You also mentioned finding some large stones that were positioned on top of other stones, making T shapes. And obviously they weren't carved out of one rock like in Göbekli Tepe, but is it that same general shape or like in Stonehenge where it looks like a lintel between two standing stones? Or what is it that you found that suggested T shapes there to you?
I think it's one of those where I was told about by one of the other explorers that they had seen this, and they had also seen a large amount of artifacts and actually they described as a mountain of artifacts. But this is a location I didn't visit, so I'm not sure. And they've kept that kind of a fairly closely guarded secret. I think out of concern for the artifacts, to be honest, because with the theft of the large stone pieces, I think they felt it was best to be a bit sort of cloak and dagger. But there is at least another site near to where I went, that has these constructions and has more artifacts. And I guess that when they are comfortable, they will probably bring out photos and reveal that. But I guess they're hoping that they'll get, a university or a government or somebody to protect that site.
Right, and I'm absolutely certain that there are at least a half a dozen groups of individuals right now that like to do this kind of research and digs all over the world. So much is being found in the last 10 or 20 years, and they're just now getting around to doing those kinds of excavations. I have no doubt that eventually somebody's going to wind up going there and with the proper equipment, Lord knows how they're going to get it there, but doing that kind of research. So I can't wait for an update. Now, is this the basis pretty much for your new book that's coming up about the lost city of giants, or is it the research in Georgia, or is it a little bit of both?
No, this one is really about, this book will be about the Ecuador side and also links in with my previous book about Australia, and links into the work that Stephen and Evan did. Because, I mean, to be honest, they provide me with a lot of links, from their own research to help with what I've been trying to do. So it does connect into the work in Australia. And just to give a very brief picture of why that is. What I found was, of course, that here in Ecuador you have this link to the Lagoa Santa people, and that takes you back, as I say, possibly to 60,000 years or around about then. I would suggest perhaps a little bit further back. Some sites have suggested more like 70,000 years ago. And if you then sort of follow this logically, if you go and look at Brazil and you look at these, obviously the remains there, you find that they're this kind of Aboriginal type people, and then if you trace where these guys have had to have come from, you look at a map and you look at sea currents and whatnot, and you look at the ice age maps, you start to sort of figure out, well, they can only really have either got there by hopping along the ice down to the south, and arriving sort of in Argentina and then the tip of Latin America, or they would have hopped across via South Africa. I mean, this is pretty much the only way you can see these people have got there. I mean, it's a pretty vast distance by boat, and especially if you're going back to a time when we generally wouldn't expect them to have, the kind of ships we have today by any means. So I've looked to see, which of those are more logical. I don't really see them going through that horrendous ice environment of the Ice Age. They go right to the south, into the icebergs and into this kind of nightmare wasteland scenario, sailing through the icebergs. It seems like a bit of a nightmare. And then, so if you look at the second option, is that they would have hopped via Africa, and then from Africa, if you look at the west coast of Africa, across to Brazil, it makes a logical, route, because certainly sailing across from West Africa to Brazil has been done. Even, fishermen have been swept out by currents and arrived on the coast of Brazil from Africa. So this is quite believable. These people could make that journey. And then if you look at the sites in South Africa that have the oldest remains of human beings, they're exactly on the southeast kind of coast of the tip of South Africa, where I would expect people sailing from the west coast of Australia and the bottom of Southeast Asia would have arrived. So you can always trace, well, you can pretty much trace these people back, and you can trace them then back to Western Australia and Southeast Asia, and you find that there are sites there which, although they haven't been officially dated yet, that we have sites, and I've been presented with images from sites in Australia that suggest, a advanced megalithic culture there, going back to what I believe was its destruction in about 74,000 years ago during the Lake Toba event. So the book really traces that and says, look, you can see the evidence of this, that there was a culture that was destroyed by that event. The refugees flee, they make the journey across to Africa, they arrive in the south of Africa. Later on, at some point, at least some of them continue onwards and head across to the Americas and arrive in Brazil. They spread, in a time when there wasn't the Amazon jungle as we know it today, and are building all across the Americas and end up at this site in Ecuador. So this is there is a logical track. And also I've had to present cultural evidence as well, and from sites, in all those countries, and pictures of, megalithic sites, which are, in some cases, have never been seen before. Particularly in Brazil, I've got images from a site that, has only recently been found, and, I don't think many people would have even heard anything about it. And also in Australia, 2 or 3 sites that people have presented me images of, which suggest a culture that is completely unknown today.
Wow, that's fascinating. And your timeline is fall, or early fall or late fall this year for the book?
Yes, I would thought so. Yeah, it'd be sort of hopefully early fall, So I'll just have to push it along a bit, do some significant rewriting. And of course, there's always new things come up in the news, which relate to it, particularly because I've tried to involve the evolutionary story of mankind in there a bit as well, which obviously that changes a lot as new finds are made. But yeah, it's kind of, should be towards then that I should have it finished, and that'll give people a good overview. And this is where, and I know we're coming towards the break, but I'll just quickly say this is kind of where the Anunnaki side gets involved, because I do talk about them in context of Africa particularly, and that's where I think we see evidence for them. And without going into the great detail, I'll just point out here that one of the Anunnaki is basically means that those who from the heavens came, is one of the interpretations, or from heaven, they came from heaven, or and one of the words for heaven is actually mu. So if you actually look at one of the words, in that language, in the ancient Sumerian language, you find that mu is a word for heaven. So you can equally say that they are, those who came from mu, those who came from heaven, or those who came from mu. So this is, in itself is a bit of a smoking gun that, I believe we are talking about these sons of mu, these people who came with this immense knowledge and this particularly an engineering skill in building with megalithic stone, who arrive in Africa and later Mesopotamia, Egypt. Their culture spreads out, but conversely, their earliest point, if you like, they also continued on to the Americas. So some of them may well have ended up staying in Africa, and others went on to Brazil. And what we see there is this sort of expansion of their knowledge, and them being seen as these kind of bringers of the light.
Wow, I'm really eager to see what you've got in that book. Who's your publisher going to be? Have you selected one yet?
Well, I have been talking to a publisher, but with the last book, I went via the self-publishing route, mainly because it's, to be honest, so much easier, because otherwise if you get a publisher, you've got to wait, quite a long time for them to put the book out. And I have to admit, I think that when you have sort of fairly cutting-edge information, you kind of want it to be out straight away. So I would probably have to do some serious weighing up as to whether or not it makes sense. But I think I will certainly try to make sure that I get professional editing and professional proofreading done myself, even if I go the other route, because I know that's one of the banes of the self-published book, is that people tend to find that it's not as well edited. So I'll have to focus on that side if I go that route. But,
well, it sounds like you're going to have an awful lot of pretty academically based references too in the book.
Yes, and I've tried, because I'm mainly doing it as initially at least, a ebook, because I want to be able to put the links in there so that people can click on and go to the original articles and go to the research. So it may be that I only go that route. I haven't really decided yet, but I may just stick with that and use it as a kind of it'd be a portal really for people to then go off and look at the references themselves. Whereas in a book, obviously you can't really do that. And I suppose that's the wonder of having ebooks, and Kindle books, is that you can do things like that. You can put it out there quickly, cheaply, and allow people to click on and see your sources and stuff for themselves. So that's been kind of the direction I've been sort of going in, if you like. I think it's probably going to be something along those lines.
Well, that sounds really interesting, and we should be checking at your website, earthforall.net, for updates on that book.
Yes, I'll be put on there.
Okay. We've only got about 2 minutes before we're going to take a break for about three minutes or so. So I want to remind folks where we're going for the next hour, literally to the other side of the world, off of the Black Sea to the east of the Black Sea in the Republic of Georgia, where Bruce has been invited to work with an expedition. This is again another elevated location, right, Bruce?
Yes, it is. I never seem to get to be able to just walk along in a field and have a look at a site. I have to go up a mountain or into a jungle or something. So
yeah, this is in the Lesser Caucasus mountain range, near a forested area, a national park area, and I think I don't want to give too much away, because that's what our whole next hour is about. But give everybody a little bit of a teaser to make them want to come back after the break.
Well, yes. I mean, it's in what is as I understand, the largest still existing ancient forested parklands in Europe, and you're, in a country which sits right on the border of Asia and Europe, in a very mysterious kind of place, and not so very far from what would have been ancient Sumer and that region. So, it's a site that most people won't know a lot about, but if you look on a map, it's kind of interestingly placed.
Mm-hmm. I just put actually, if it will finish uploading, I just put the map up in the chat room. There we go. Baltic Sea, and just to the north, the Russian Federation, and just to the south, Turkey and Armenia. So this is fairly close to the area where Mount Ararat is, right? Isn't that in the northeast corner of Turkey? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that region. And also, of course, in Turkey, you've got these ancient sites coming up now, which are accepted as being at least 12,000 years old. So, you're looking at a part of the world that really is starting to offer up some really ancient secrets.
And we do have some super photographs of a professor who was handling and studying the bones, and I believe that is it Dr. Vojka? Is that his name? Vojka?
Vecua.
Vecua. And he's since passed away, but I can't wait for you to tell us a little bit more about the bones that he's handling. I'm not going to put that picture up yet either, but again, let me just remind everybody you're listening to Voyages Radio here on Inception Radio Network, and this show will be rebroadcast on Friday night on Dark Matter Radio Network at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Also, this show will be archived here at Inception Radio Network in about a week from today, a little less than a week. So if you have something that came up during the show and you had to leave us, come back and check out the archive starting next Monday. It'll also eventually be on epicvoyagers.com, our website. So, Bruce, let's take a break, and I think I'm going to go chug a half a bottle of cough medicine.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Hi, can you hear my voice? Imagine how many other people can hear it too. If you have advertising needs, then look no further. The Inception Radio Network currently has openings for on-air advertisements and radio show sponsorships. Given any thought to your target demographic? Inception has you covered there too. Advertising on a network gives you multiple opportunities to advertise on a wide variety of radio show broadcasts, and we have one to fit every advertising need. In recent years, internet radio has exhibited a phenomenal listener growth. An Arbitron Edison survey shows that online radio boosts at least 33 million unique visitors each week and 54 million each month. And that number amazingly continues to grow. And these listeners are a part of many businesses' core demographics. And surveys have shown that internet radio listeners are far more likely than regular radio listeners to spend money on a whole range of activities. Internet listeners vote, they dine out and eat fast food, and they grab a cup of coffee. And here's the interesting one. They buy items online at a much higher rate than all other market segments combined. Internet radio also enables businesses to connect with consumers during work hours, where increasingly more lifestyle decisions are being made. Advertise with the best. The Inception Radio Network offers competitive advertising rates to fit just about anyone's advertising budget. Stop by today at www.inceptionradionetwork.com or call us toll-free at 1-888-919-2355. Get the word out. Get results with the Inception Radio Network.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
Looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry, IRN's interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN Chat Lounge, Game Lounge, Video Lounge, or the Mood Lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless, so use your time wisely by keeping it all on IRN.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Howdy, this is Joe Mars. I'm inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com. That's EPICVOYAGERS.com.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to Epic Voyages Radio. I'm your host tonight, Laurel Tague, and for our guest, we have Bruce Fenton. If you missed our first hour, you really missed a doozy. We were talking about his work in Ecuador, going into the higher elevations in the Amazon jungle, and finding what appear to be man-made, perhaps even cement-joined building masonry, at least walls. Maybe there's a possibility that there could be pyramids. We don't know yet. Stone tools, especially a hammer. If you're just joining us in the chat room, scroll back and look at some of the pictures we've been putting on there. Or go to his website, Net4All, N-E-T, the number 4, A-L-L, Net for All. I'm sorry, Earth for All. Sorry, Bruce.
That's
Earth
okay,
for
yeah.
All. EARTH, the number 4, ALL.net. That's where the net comes from. Earthforall.net. And this hour, we're going to be talking about his research on the other side of the world in the Republic of Georgia off the Black Sea, just above Turkey. Before we do that, Bruce, I remembered that you said something about as you were leaving the coast there of Ecuador and moving up back into the mountains to Cuenca, that is where Father Crespi's collection is supposed to be. And you said that you may have access to that and you'll be working with that. Can you say a little bit about that before we go off into the Republic of Georgia?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's, you know, I guess like with many of your listeners, I mean, I've always been kind of captivated by this, you know, what was found in the areas near Cuenca and ended up in the museum there. I mean, Father Crespi was a Catholic missionary, but he was also an anthropologist and a very educated scholar in his own rights, who sort of befriended the local tribe, to many of them, and that they started to give in anthropology and archaeology, and they started giving him pieces, you know, often metal pieces, sometimes silver and gold, other times, you know, not such valuable metals, but I mean the artifacts themselves still extraordinary, bringing out massive amounts of carved copper scrolls, pieces of strange steel pipe that look like, you know, from functioning machinery of some sort, and a whole wealth of artifacts, you know, from crowns to all sorts of strange, you know, things we don't know what they are. In the end, he ended up with thousands of artifacts, which he, you know, at one point the Crespi collection was the single largest collection of any museum in Ecuador, you know, outshining anything in Quito or anywhere else. So, you know, this was an immense collection. And then when Crespi died, suddenly the museum was all closed off, and nobody has really had access since then. And there is a number of stories as to whether or not the government seized them or whether the Vatican seized them. Nobody really knows the ins and outs of where this collection went. And I'm very interested in doing a bit of snooping around in Cuenca to see if I can find out if there's anything still in the building there, and also, of course, where the artifacts have gone, and potentially make contact with anyone that might know where those artifacts came from, because I have no doubt that the children of those people that gave him the artifacts also know where these objects came from. But of course, you have to be in their trust. So we'll see. But I'm quite keen to make that trust, if you like, and see if we can track down the sources of these artifacts, and also find out what's left in the Crespi collection today, if it's there at all.
Well, that's very exciting, and that sounds like another documentary that's waiting to be made.
Yes, quite possibly. And I think that there's a lot of intrigue in that story, and either way, whether the government or whether the Vatican took it, again, that's a kind of a cover-up, and it shouldn't have happened. There's no reason for the museum to become sort of, closed off and a secret. So in itself, that kind of suggests something underhand, and perhaps people were not comfortable with the fact that these Indians were turning up with artifacts that showed links to Egypt, to Sumeria, to ancient Europe, and to cultures that we just don't know of. There's pieces there that that have writing on them which are in languages that are just totally unknown, and cultures depicted which we have no reference for. So there is that arrow pointing towards a long lost civilization that had collected these, or that perhaps was a proto civilization to all of them. So this is one of the questions where it raises as to whether or not there's some kind of cover-up there, because it does undo the entire narrative of our accepted history.
Yeah, I put a couple of links in the chat room, one to Ancient Origins. There's a nice article on there about the Crespi collection, and another one for people that are in the chat room that would like to take a look at that. I forgot to give out the dial-in number, 888-919-2355, if you'd like to ask Bruce Fenton a question directly related to anything we talked about last hour in Ecuador, or coming up now, we're going to be talking about the Republic of Georgia and the giant bones that they found there. I know I mentioned this at the start, but Bruce, in your own words, why don't you describe what this farmer, this herdsman, found when he stumbled into this burial chamber? Can you, in your own words, can you describe that?
Yes, I mean, as I understand it, one of these sort of herdsmen that goes up into the mountains there, and during the summer had stumbled upon an entrance to what appeared to be sort of a crypt. He entered into it, and there inside was an ancient sort of table with these two skeletons sat at the table, and they were of giant proportions. And so it seemed that they had been kind of interred in this, in this crypt, unknown time ago, but put in this sort of strange position as though they were still sitting at the table together. And so this kind of sparked I guess a bit of a sort of a local legend and a story that eventually made its way to some researchers in the capital. If I get this right, I think it's Tbilisi. And they sort of put an expedition together and actually hiked all the way up into the site. And this is up to many years later, I say. I mean, I don't know how old that story is, but many years later, so we can say, these people arrived, and what they found was that this crypt had collapsed, and that was now filled with dirt and leaves and general debris, and that you could see the walls of the crypt, but the ceiling was now all fallen in, and the rocks were mixed in with earth, so you couldn't now see what this herdsman had seen. But with some slight amount of digging, they did recover bones, so that it did validate that, if you like, there was large bones were found just not too far beneath the surface.
Mm-hmm. I've just been peppering the chat room here with photos of the bones, and of the bones lying there in the dirt, I guess maybe after the roof had caved in, and then the map showing where you've been describing that we're at. And if you look at that map in the chat room, and you see stretched across the southern part of the Republic of Georgia the words Lesser Caucasus. Just above the LES in Lesser, you'll see the name of the national park, which borders this area that we're talking about, where Bruce has. You've already gone there at least once, haven't you? Or is this your first trip that you're going?
I've been there once. I mean, the initial expedition was in 2008, as I understand, and then, the follow-up, which I was a part of, was last year. My brain's working correctly here, so it would have been last year, and then we should be going back at the end of this year, or towards the end of this year.
I also just put up a photo here of, let me make sure I've got his name right, Vecua, Dr. Vecua, who's actually holding the bone. I guess it's a femur, and the skull is on the table in front of him, so people can get kind of a sense of scale there. And he is deceased now, right?
Yes, he is, unfortunately. I mean, Professor Vecua was extremely respected. I mean, he was, for those who kind of keep a track of, not news about ancient hominids and stuff, he was the discoverer and researcher intimately involved with the find of the 1.8 million year old Homo erectus in Georgia, which I think they've called Homo georgicus or Homo erectus georgicus. So he was internationally respected for his work on ancient hominids, and that's the reason really why the bones were presented to him by the biologist that was on the expedition, which was Irakli Julikids, and so he knew him, and he kind of gave the bones to him, knowing that he would be able to give a very educated opinion on them. So really was a mainstream, respected scientist. This is not sort of some kook or anything along those lines. So yeah, you couldn't really want a better person's opinion. Unfortunately, whilst involved with this initial stage of the research, he did die. So this presented a huge problem because he had received the samples, and the samples had gone into archives in the museum, and nobody knew where they were once he had passed away. And these samples that you see there, they've not been found, and they are somewhere in the archives of the museum. And as it's been explained to me, this is an enormous archive, and that you'd have to go through boxes and boxes. You can imagine, something like the scene from Indiana Jones where they have all the boxes in the warehouse of all the artifacts. So something on those lines where you just really, nobody has any idea how to find them again. So that's one reason why that research didn't go to where we would have liked it to, is the combination of him dying and the samples being lost. So that was why they had to mount the follow-up expedition, really.
Talk about bad luck.
Yes.
So they weren't really able to, they didn't have enough time. He didn't have them long enough and wasn't able to really collect enough data to even get any kind of preliminary results out.
Not really, no. Only that he suspected that they could be from, a very large human, and obviously some of the figures presented online were suggestive of something in the region of maybe 8 foot, 9 foot, possibly. Something, a very tall person. Again, in that same kind of height as we talked about in Ecuador.
I think I read 2.5 to 3 meters, so somewhere between 8 and 10 feet was the estimate.
Yeah, well, and he couldn't give. We didn't get to that point of the final, DNA analysis or anything like that, unfortunately.
And this is at 1,800 meters, which is roughly what in feet? Can you do that translation for me?
I guess it's going to be something towards 5,000 something feet. I'm not too quick on the.
So it's about a mile up, roughly.
Yeah, I mean it's a fair old hike up. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, it was it's kind of an area. If you imagine, if I just quickly put that in context as well, that at this site, it's only possible to actually visit the site during the summer because there's intense snowfall there, and that for most of the year it's just cut off. It's in the forest, deep in the forests, and then you go up a mountain which literally is covered in snow for most of the year, and that you can only access it for about 3 months a year. So it's a really off the map kind of place. That you really, nobody would genuinely go beyond the odd herdsman who take the cows up sometimes to graze in the meadows there that, whilst they are actually meadows, and then, occasionally they would stumble on things. So it's not an area that many people would ever go into, and it is inhospitable.
And it must be pretty, I won't say densely forested, but there's quite a few forests around, sort of shrouding the area.
Yes, there are. I mean, some parts, when you go up the mountain, it kind of gets to a point where you're sort of getting above the tree line a little bit. But, I mean, mostly you are, travelling through, pretty dense forests. I mean, it's, it's a protected, national park, so it's left as ancient woods. And it's in parts, you could certainly easily get lost. I mean, you're going through just narrow trails, through woodlands. There's nothing... Mostly there's nothing resembling a road. I mean, there are some parts where the rangers have had to, put in some basic roads to reach their ranger stations and stuff, but I mean, that's about it. And even that, you're not talking about real highways, you're talking about, dirt roads, which they've put in for themselves, but not really any easy access generally, no. And there's no particular reason why there would be, because no one's supposed to go in there beyond, I guess, biologists and researchers, an eco project type people that might go in to study the local flora and fauna. And then, as I say, these few sort of farmers who just graze their cattle up in these hills above the tree line. So it's really somewhere that it's very fortunate that anyone would stumble on anything, you could say, because it's just this immense forest in which hardly anyone goes.
I can't imagine being up there with my small herd of goats or cattle and coming around a corner and there sit two giant skeletons at a table. I can't even imagine what must have gone through the guy's mind. I've been putting pictures up in the chat room, and the one I've just recently put up shows the wall that has fallen over and these huge building stones. Obviously, this is a man-made structure. Were you able to get a good look at the wall that was in at firsthand that is in some of the photographs of that are on your website?
Yes, I mean, that is well, again, it's kind of a mysterious site. I mean, some of the locals thought that perhaps it was an ancient church, because there's legends that I think it was St. Andrew went sort of, through that area at one point on his travels, and that, so some of the sites in the region are kind of dedicated to him, some of the not the Orthodox Christian churches and stuff. So that they thought maybe it was one of his ancient churches, but I'd be... I think that's debatable. I think it's most likely some kind of ancient temple, but possibly an ancient fort. But it's not known who built that. But you're talking probably in the region of 1,500 years in age. And there's a kind of cement used there, which is a bit like a Roman cement, which similar style. So we have some idea of when that was built, but not necessarily the oldest level of it. It may well be that people have rebuilt on top of an older structure that was there, because it seemed that there was potentially a basement area that was filled in. Certainly there was a square that looked like it should have been, the entrance to a stairway that would have gone down into the ground. And there's no floor left as such, so you can't really tell, what the oldest level there would have been. So it may be that you have, a couple of different eras involved, but certainly the upper part of it, I would agree with them that it's somewhere in that range of around, I guess 1,000 to 2,000 years old, but somewhere probably close to 1,500 years old, of an unknown origin. It may be a solar temple. It certainly seems to be aligned east-west, and it's up on a ridge, a high ridge, so you would see the sun sort of rise across. And this is actually just a few meters from this crypt. So what is the Giant's Crypt, it seems to have been some part of this other structure. It may have been actually, in fact, some kind of cellar for it that was then used as a crypt to bury these strange skeletons in. There's some talk as to whether or not these were found and then interred in there to give them a Christian burial or something of those likes. We don't know if the skeletons were always in that crypt. So there's a lot of kind of, unknowns, if you like, but certainly there's a strange structure there. And again, it's, in a location which is quite inhospitable, and even its existence is a bit mysterious, even though it's not perhaps the oldest part of the site.
So we're not really saying that these giants are like 1,500 or 2,000 years old before they died, but we're not saying that they aren't. You just don't know.
We don't know for
Because the
sure,
bones
but
are misplaced and we can't find them again yet.
Well, one of the bones was tested, and this is after the expedition that I went on with the Science Channel. They took a fragment back, and this was tested. And this is actually a fragment that the biologist Irakli had still got, fortunately, a small piece of bone from his original find. And this was taken to be tested in the UK. And they found that this was definitely from a human of some sort, and that it was, if I get it right, it was over 1,000 years old. But they couldn't get the full DNA sort of mapping done, and they couldn't sort of tell us too much about this, person, other than that it was not an animal bone. It was from some kind of human, and that it was at least a sort of 1,000 years old. So it seemed to be the timeline seemed to place it to being potentially connected to that site. So I don't think that it was these giants were necessarily ancient when we start talking about sites that go back to 12,000 years ago, like in Turkey or elsewhere, and we start talking about the borderline, what I would say, with Atlantean times. I think that these giants that were there would have been, I guess, perhaps the last group of them, that managed to survive up until around that period, and they may have been related to the structure that was there. But what interests me is there's older things up there.
Well, here's a question from the chat room that kind of is hinting at how old they might be. Neutron, again, who's on a roll tonight, wants to know if the land elevation there in this area is high enough to have been above the level of the last great flood, say 1,000 feet above sea level, or if lower. He wonders if these structures are partially buried in the mud caused by a mudslide caused by the flood. Do you have any idea?
I mean, again, we have to sort of speculate onto how high up waves could have come during the last major cataclysm. If we talk about this sort of the Atlantean destruction events, if we're talking about 12, around that 13,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know precisely. I suppose no one really knows precisely, how big the waves would have been in somewhere like that in Georgia. Only that, that potentially that could have been a survival site. Certainly you're up on a mountain, and I did see evidence of destruction on a sort of, you could say, on a cataclysmic scale elsewhere on the way up. There was the remnants of a very ancient road, which I would say that predates the structure on the hill, and that was really in ruins. It was at first you don't really notice you're on a road, but then you start to realize that there's blocks that are flat blocks buried in the mud around you, and that in the sides of this kind of path that you're walking on. And at some points it just becomes very obvious that this was once a paved stone road, but it's in such destruction, and in some places it looks almost like the path being turned at an angle, like the land moved, and has thrown this thing into total chaos. So I would speculate on that this was a site that was there during the last flood, the last major destruction event, and that what we see there, this, the site which goes to about 1,000 years ago, is really just the last point in which there was any major activity up there, but not the beginning point of when this activity was going on up there, and that it's quite possible that we're looking at some connection to the earthquakes and the flooding at the end of the Ice Age that destroyed this site.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm putting up in the chat room right now one of your photographs of the what you described as an ancient carved skull on a cliff along the pathway. Mm-hmm. Why don't you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, this was really interesting. It's one of these things I didn't pick up at the time, and actually my wife pointed it out later. But when we were making our way through a canyon, which you have to sort of, hike in a river. Literally, you're wading in a river for a canyon with, 100-meter high, walls on either side. And it was actually during this part of the expedition that we encountered this very strange feature in the side of the cliff, and there was nothing else like it. Nothing else like it at all. Just this strange feature. Look, and then in hindsight, when she pointed out, she said, "Look, it looks like a skull." You sort of realize, actually, it does look like you've got the basic remnant features of a face there, like a skull face, but heavily eroded. Extremely heavily eroded. And this is in a site where, one of the things that really sort of started to blow my mind, if I'll be honest, and say that as I was walking through this canyon, you suddenly start thinking of some of the ancient legends, especially from the Greeks and stuff, that these sites where the brave warrior has to go in through the canyon while the giants are rolling the boulders down on them, and you're thinking, well, there's giant boulders in the middle of this river that look like they've been rolled down off the side of these cliffs. This is an unbelievably good defensive position. And then in hindsight, with this big skull carved into the side, local stories are giants were there. Giants lived up there. Giants lived in this area. They abducted people. There's many sites around that, not so far from there, if you like, in the woods and outside of the woods, which are, Giants Lake, Giants Hall, Giants this and that. So, you're in an area where that is local legend as well. And as you get in, then you climb the mountain, you have to climb up this weaving mountain path. And all the way, you can't help thinking of all these, these ancient stories, the mythology of, the warriors going in through the canyon up the mountain to fight the, the evil ones or whoever they are, whether you put in there vampires or giants or whoever, you can put in, evil enemy X, but the background scenery was just so in keeping, this ancient forest with this canyon and this mountain, and you can't help but start to connect the dots and say, am I walking in site X where these legends really spring up from?
Wow, that definitely the next time you go back, bring more pictures.
Yes, I will.
Not to fault your website, and I'm sure you have a lot of pictures that you didn't put out there, but yes. You make it sound like something that people would really want to go see and take a look around. And now that you said that about the creepy forest, now we want to go and experience a creepy forest too.
Yes, it is a bit. And there's bears and wolves and all that there as well. You had mentioned pieces of square-shaped columns lying beside the path. What was that about? Yes, that's right. At one point, I started to notice that not only were there blocks that looked like they could have been parts of of a wall or of a Neolithic burial mound, but there were these large pieces of what looked to me like, columns. There were some very large, long pieces of, smooth four-sided, block that looked like they were parts of broken columns. There were other pieces there as well, again, like I say, that suggested to me that there had at some point been probably something like Neolithic burial mounds or something like that. If anyone is sort of, seen the inside of a Neolithic burial mound. I have, unfortunately I'm English and I've been able to go to Neolithic burial sites in, in Avebury and Stonehenge area and the southwest of England where I'm from. And I suppose that gave me the advantage that actually I was aware that some of these blocks I was seeing at the side of the path would have fitted very well into one of those constructions. So it may be that we were seeing remnants of of a Neolithic culture or somebody else that was there, or again it could be. It's really hard to say, but I would say, quite possibly that these were remnants of some sort of Neolithic culture. This was about, probably 3 hours before reaching the main site. So, even en route, you're already seeing signs of ancient habitation of that area. Mm-hmm. So certainly I think that, we're talking about a large area of habitation in that forest, not just up on the mountain, and that, quite possibly more than one culture at more than one time. These would suggest people of around, perhaps going back to 5,000 years ago, that style of building. And so I saw quite a number of very large, carved stones on the way in towards the site. And again, this road, which began to sort of become more apparent as we went in, which had these sort of flat-faced blocks still sort of jutting out of the mud. So, you have a number of different, observations that can be made on the way in.
Very interesting. Let me give out our dial-in number again, 888-919-2355. Call in now and talk to Bruce Fenton and ask him a question about the research that he's involved in, either in Ecuador or here in the Republic of Georgia. Can you say anything more about the documentary that's going to be filmed later on this year that you're going over there for?
Yeah, I'd say that one of the things that's really sparked this, if you like, and at the moment, it's in the early stages. We're in the talks with the production companies, in talks with networks, and we're hopeful that a major network is going to go with it. It seems to be indicated that they will. And also we're talking to an organisation, an independent archaeological research organisation, which are also interested in collaborating and that would be doing a web coverage for this. So it may well be that, there's major web coverage and also TV coverage split between two different organizations. And the reason it's particularly interesting to them is that there is another part to this site which I feel is vastly older than this ruined temple or fort or whatever exactly it is, and that is much older than the bones that were found in the crypt. And so though those were the destination in the first expedition is what we were really going up there to look at. This time the focus is going to be slightly different, because what I saw there about 10 minutes walk from that site was something far more extraordinary. One of the chaps there sort of said to me, look, so there was a bit of a kerfuffle, you could say, because it turned out that we didn't have the right permits to do a dig, and we'd wanted to see a dig, and to pull bones out of the ground, and as you could imagine, obviously that makes for great television. What doesn't make for great television is standing around a hole with nobody doing anything. So we kind of were disappointed, and in the ensuing kind of disagreement, one of the chaps there sort of indicates to me, says, there are some more bones, in the woods. By this point, I'm pretty skeptical. I'm thinking, am I going to get taken off to see an old fox or something that's decayed in the woods? Because, you don't really know whether it's just the last clause of desperation or something to show us something. So we've, I follow this guy, takes us off up the path, takes us off the path into the woods. And you come to this, what at first glance just seems to be a sort of boulder, mostly covered in earth with, plants over the top. It doesn't look that exciting. It gets in a bit closer, says, now look, and he pulls a piece out of it, holds it up, and it's a piece of bone. And he says, you look closer, and this block is riddled with bone. It's hard to describe, and I haven't shared the pictures because it was I felt it was very sensitive in a way that I've kept this sort of private, I suppose, in that the pieces of bone in it are petrified. I mean, so these are really ancient pieces of bone. They're not the same as the other one. The 1,000-year-old bone is not petrified. It's aged and it's orange and all the rest. You can tell it's old, but it's not petrified. This is something much older, and the block is made entirely of pieces of stone and bone. There was no sign of any mortar. And I'm going to just add a bit to that. I saw bone in there that was bent at right angles with no sign of fracturing or breaks. Between pieces of stone. So how that was done, I don't know. But to me, that cries at technology. This isn't just, someone's somehow crushing together bones and stones. Somebody was able to melt bone and use the bone as the mortar, and it's holding these pieces of stone together. And it makes an incredibly strong and durable concrete mix. And there was a large block of this, and so interesting in itself. And then he takes us, another few meters away, there's another load of it sticking out of the ground. A few meters away from that, more of it, and what appears to be a filled-in entrance to a tunnel. He tells us a story of how when he came up before, he tested that area with a metal rod banging the ground, and that you could tell from the reverberations there was something, there was an empty area, and then the rod breaks through, falls into the ground, disappears with a clang, and so he says that there is a chamber there. And this combines with a local story, again from the herdsman, that at one point, some time ago, somebody had stumbled on a cave. And in this cave, they'd seen a mummified giant in place. So we are quite hopeful that this is what we are, what we are standing above was this chamber with the mummified giant in it. And looking at this concrete, all I can say is it's probably the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, and I'll say that, as someone who's been to a lost city in the Amazon jungle. So, I mean, it's probably the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, because I couldn't figure how you could have done this, how you could have melted the bone, to right angles without some kind of high energy technology that we no longer have.
That is amazing. Definitely, I hope that is on your to-do list for this trip that's coming up this fall.
That's an absolute focus. That and another site which was given to me by a member of the team, actually, that's involved now, which is a chap called Ramas. And he is a producer for one of the Georgian sort of media networks, but he's also very interested in Georgian history and archaeology and mysterious sites. But he sent me across images of what appears to be a very ancient stone construction. Looks like some kind of, I'm not sure where to put it, almost like a kind of a tower or something, but very old, built to a cliff face with these rectangular doorways going into it. And in the other photo, showed the inside is tunnels with a kind of mortar in the roof. And he says, again, this is in the middle of woods. And he said nobody is supposed to have lived there at all. And it looks incredibly ancient. And we're going to go to that site as well. We're going to see if there's a tunnel network. He suspects there's a tunnel network under that site as well. This is about 20 kilometers away from the mountain. And I know that Irakli has some other sites he wants to show us, including one with a cave where they have found bone that has become almost part of the cave wall. It's so overgrown with the stone that it must be incredibly ancient. So we're going to be looking at several sites which are all potentially, from so long ago they don't fit into Georgian history, which is 5,000 years of known history.
That really is exciting. It sounds like more than a 1-hour show to me, though.
Probably. I mean, the network people, they have kind of said that they would like to film out there for a month. So, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, there's multiple sites that we can go to. I mean, I don't want to sort of drag you down too much because I can go off, onto different angles with this. But there's a site called Kavamli Mountain, which Irakli is very keen to take us to, and that's because that is the location of the original story of Prometheus. And this is sort of the proto-Greek story. It goes before the Greek story. There is this Georgian legend of a Prometheus-type character who steals the fire of the gods and is chained to Kavamli Mountain, where his liver is eaten every day by a bird of prey. And on the same mountain, it's said that the Argonauts hid their treasure, and also the kings of ancient Georgia, and even Egyptians seem to have hidden things there, that there's a strange wealth in tunnels inside the mountain. And we know there's tunnels. I've seen video of tunnels in there, even with symbols on the walls in there and stuff. So this is another important site. So I think Georgia has a lot of very important sites to show the world. And take that into context as well. Just keep in mind what I said earlier, that in Georgia they found a 1.8 million year old Homo erectus who just should not be there, because that's when we find them in Africa. They're not supposed to be in the middle of Eurasia 1.8 million years ago at the same time as we find them in Africa. It suggests something very strange. Perhaps that mankind is evolving in two places at once, for instance. That if we're going to say that this is evolution happening in Africa, well, why not in Georgia then? Because you've got the same candidate that is pointed out in Africa to be our progenitor found in Georgia at the same time. So did this guy evolve? And in which case we have the potential in Georgia to have a unique and very ancient story of human evolution, and that cultures that we know nothing about to have risen and fallen in that area.
Right. You were talking about tunnels and caves, and I know I don't remember geographically exactly where Cappadocia is in Turkey, but there's more than one city that they have found with very extensive tunnel systems with rooms and storage areas for food and water and areas for animals. And this area we're talking about is a little to the north of Turkey. So I wonder if they were doing the same kinds of building projects using the mountain. Instead of digging down into the bedrock, they just tunneled into the mountain and found some caves, and it was easier to cut through. Think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've looked at some of that information out from Turkey, and it does make me wonder, how large a network we could stumble on in Georgia, and certainly with what I say with the Kavamli Mountain, I know there's supposed to be an extensive tunnel network, that we may well find that there is significant sized underground cities in Georgia, just as there are in Turkey. So I mean, there could be enormous discoveries. I think we have to in a way reevaluate that whole story as well of the Noah's Ark, which of course supposedly came to rest in that precise sort of region of the world. That maybe Noah's Ark wasn't so much on top of the mountain as it was the mountain, that it was inside the mountain, that these arks were built into mountains, and they were tunnel systems that people could go into with their livestock and all the rest of it and hide, just as we've seen in Turkey, that an entire town could just go underground. So I do wonder what we could find. I mean, stories have come out from, I believe it was in Romania or somewhere a few years back, that they found giant bones and then a tunnel network, and then supposedly the CIA and whatnot got involved, and it all was hushed up. So I mean, there are the areas in sort of Eastern Europe where tales have come out about these kind of finds. So yeah, I think Georgia may be, if you like, the best hope we're going to have to really get an answer, because this time we have the government actually collaborating, local researchers, foreign researchers, and the government, all kind of hand in hand, with media coverage, looking that it's going to be there on hand to record it. And I just don't see that happening anywhere else, really. In the US, certainly not. And here we didn't have that. So I think that we all sort of cross our fingers, that later this year, that if it all goes ahead as it's planned, we're going to finally have an opportunity to really answer this question as to, what the heck was going on in that region when you go back to the ancient times, and what is still there to be seen, what's underground.
The other thing that you're reminding me of, and speaking about the Eastern Europe and the digs and the giant bones, I can't remember exactly which book it was that I was reading sometime in the last couple of years, but the topic of the book was not necessarily from a biblical perspective, the Nephilim, the fallen angels, but specifically the Nephilim, the giants, the huge men of old, and it went into great detail on the different, not so much the what am I trying to say? Not the dynasty of the giants, but this giant had 3 sons, and they went in these 3 different directions, and then 2 of them had sons that went in some other direction, and it was going through the heritage of these different families of giants. And I remember at least some of them wound up in Kazakhstan, which is not far at all from where we're talking about. I think that some of them were in Armenia, which is also very close to where we're talking about. So this sounds like this is part of the geography in this description of the genealogy of the giants that were basically the children of the angels and the daughters of men who were so beautiful.
Yes.
Am I reminding you of anything that you've read that sounds like that? Have you heard about some sort of genealogy of giants?
Yes, in Georgia, as I recall, I read an article and it was saying that, if I have this right, I think it was one of the grandsons of one of the, I think I may be on the lines of a great grandson of Noah or something along these lines, and that he ended up in Georgia, and that his bloodline became sort of the kings of Georgia, and that the people there would tell you that in the past their kings, some of them were considered to have been giants. I was told by one chap there that there's an enormous sword, like a 200 battle sword, which is kept in a museum somewhere there, which belonged to one of the kings. And he says it's just too large for a normal human to wield it. He says it's just massive. And he says that these kings were, in their view, they had giant-sized kings, and that their lore sort of talks about this, great grandson of Noah or something on those lines, who ends up there, and and they talk about the different kinds of giants. To Georgians, there's at least 3 kinds of giants. There's giant humans, which will include some of the biblical characters, obviously with the Goliath type giant, who is, as far as they're concerned, basically very big people, and just like their king and whatnot, and potentially, I guess survivors of the flood, some kind of group of very tall people. And then they have another type of giant, which is let me get this right, it's called gone out of my mind, but there's another type of giant, has a very muscular, very large giant with kind of 2 small horns on its head. And I think you had a picture I had which shows a statue of one.
Right.
So I don't know if you shared that.
I'm going to do it right now.
Okay, that's a Devi giant. I remember now. Yeah, it's called a Devi. So they're one of the ones that are said to have lived in caves and in tunnels, which would come and grab people, and take them off. And then there is the last type of giant, which is the kind of the wild man of the woods, which we would all think of as being the abominable snowman, Yeti, Sasquatch, that type. They have a variety of that there as well, which is again this kind of red-haired, shabby, larger than normal human type hominid, which is usually seen out in the dense forests. So the Georgians just, do have 3 distinct types of giants that they refer to in both, historically and in legends, which again is interesting in a way, that there's that clear sort of cut, yes, we had this kind of giant, which is definitely human, real giant, and then there's the others, which, okay, the Wild Man seems to be accepted by a lot of people, and then of course the last one, which is more the children's story giant now be seen as. But once upon a time doesn't mean it wasn't real, and again it's interesting to see that connection between those evil giants and caves and tunnels. That were they living in these underground systems? These were the ones that would come out and abduct people. So it's kind of interesting. They're the ones I suppose you might say, if any, would link back to the Nephilim and that evil sort of imagery, that the idea of fallen angels and taking people against their will and stuff. So they kind of cover all bases in their giant lore, if you like, in Georgia. So it's quite interesting to think that they have these accepted giants as kings as well. So it makes for an interesting kind of angle.
I was recently reading something, and it might have been on Ancient Origins on their website, that said that some of the portrayals of Moses show him with two little horns coming out of the top of his head.
Okay, that is interesting. Yeah, I do wonder, whether or not there's some sort of connection there with the biblical giants then.
Right, and I know I've read before that Alexander the Great was portrayed with two little horns coming out of I don't know if it was out of his forehead or sort of to the side by his ears, but horns, little small horns coming out of the head seems to be associated with either power, I can understand that, but maybe these individuals actually did have something that looked like horns. Who knows? Maybe that's another DNA trait, like the 6 fingers and toes and the double rows of teeth.
Possibly, and also I know from some research many years ago into some of the biblical stories that one of the translations that is used for the horns coming out of Lucifer's head can actually be taken as light coming out of his head. So this idea of horns, the word could have been translated either way. So what would have been light emitting from their head became horns and are physically represented as horns now.
Interesting. Well, I have one more thing I wanted to ask you that you brought up in talking to me before the weekend, and you mentioned the work of Rudolf Steiner, how as it applies to some of this that we're talking about giants. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Well, what it is Heracli, that the biologist, he's kind of very interested in sort of both the work of Rudolf Steiner and also going to Madame Blavatsky and some of the scholars of that era. And so in some of his work, he does talk about the ages of man and the different falls and stuff, which are particularly, I suppose, from the work of Helena Blavatsky more so. But yeah, the rise and fall of different types of human over the eras. And there's actually an article on my website which is written by him, so people can have a read through on there. And he sort of describes, how at the end of each kind of era, a type of human falls, disappears, and then another that's living alongside them takes over. And then this keeps happening, that you'll find that there's a kind of a superior and an inferior race at any point, or a group, depends on how different they are. And then at the end of that destruction event, usually the one that was in a worse position originally ends up being in charge, and so it keeps evolving forward. And then a few remnants will be left of those, previous sort of masters of the earth. So they kind of look at this kind of way of evolving, that this is the destruction events allowing for this other groups to then take over, and it keeps happening again and again.
Bruce, are you still with me?
Oh, sorry, did you lose me?
I didn't lose you. I know you're using your mute to kind of protect us from the sounds of people moving your household, getting ready to take you to Cuenca tomorrow. But
yes, that's right. Yes,
I thought you stopped so quickly. I thought maybe that I lost you and you weren't just done.
Quite possibly, yeah. Sorry, a few things that were still in this room, had to be moved. So yeah, they're just quickly moving them out.
Right.
So apologies for that. But yeah, no, I think that the work of Blavatsky particularly is interesting, that it does sort of tackle this idea of fallen civilizations and new types of human appearing, and that's where sort of Heracli, his work has kind of touched on. And again, like I say, there is an article on my website from Heracli which covers that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, very interesting kind of tie-in, and he provides some information in the article which I wasn't aware of, which ties into the subject. So I would definitely suggest it to readers.
Now, I know of Blavatsky and Steiner, but I don't know them. I'm not familiar enough with them to know the answer to this question. Would they have seen this cyclical fall and then rise of the next group and fall again? Would they have seen that as somehow tied in with karma, that these are people learning through multiple lifetimes, or is this just all of these are individuals? Do you know that?
I wouldn't be able to give a definitive answer on that. I haven't studied it enough myself. I mean, I've read a little bit of Steiner's work and a little bit of Blavatsky's work, but I haven't delved into the real body of their material. So I probably wouldn't be doing them a justice if I tried to start.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with it. I think we're talking about theosophy, right?
Yeah, really, yeah. So I mean, it's a broad and vast sort of subject area, which I'm only familiar with the edges of, really. I mean, obviously the seminal works of Blavatsky is her is it The Secret Doctrine of the Ages? I think it's right, which is 2 enormous sort of manuals of information.
It is. It's enormous. It's very lengthy, and I actually have a copy of it here. I did a lot of reading and studying metaphysics in the 70s and the 80s, but her style of writing, specifically because of the time period when she wrote, makes it even more difficult to read. I mean, these are difficult concepts to grasp anyway, and then the writing style of that period, after you've gone about 50 pages, it's just kind of off-putting for me, and it's just really difficult to follow. But I don't remember anything about karma, cyclical incarnations from at least her. I'm less familiar with Steiner, but it's really interesting that one of your colleagues there involved in this research has sort of an inside track on that information. I do remember seeing the article, and I did take it down and read it, but I didn't really ask any details about it tonight because I realized it wasn't really your work, so I figured that we'd just stick to the things that you're focusing on yourself. So, well, Bruce, we've got about maybe not even 4 minutes left. What would do you have any, other than your research that's coming up in Georgia, do you have any kind of conferences or meetings or anything that you've got coming up, or any other radio interviews?
Not just at the moment. I think with the move coming up, so I haven't really tried to get involved with anything else yet. But I believe once we move to Cuenca, there is the possibility of, I'm too sort of specific, but there's a possibility I maybe get involved with doing tours here, and also doing a lot more sort of online sort of activities and stuff. So I mean, there's a kind of a job brewing in the background, which is part of my reason to move, which is sort of an early stage to talk about. But I will say that if people sort of monitor my website, I will update that. But it may be that, in the near future, I might be involved with conferences and also tours and, other activities here in Ecuador. So sort of please keep an eye on the website for that. So when I can sort of announce it a bit more officially. And in terms of interviews, not at the moment. I don't think I've got anything else that's booked in. So I think it's just a case of, keeping an eye on the website, and I will update people. I've been a bit slack, I haven't updated for a while on there. So I do need to put a couple of new articles up. And also I will, if I get the official kind of confirmation on the documentary, then hopefully I'll be allowed to talk about that. As it probably depends on whether there's any kind of, caveats put into the contract as to whether or not I can talk about it in advance. So I have to be sort of a bit cryptic on all those fronts at the moment. But, as and when I get things confirmed, hopefully I can at least sort of say, look, this is going ahead and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So if they kind of monitor the website. But yeah, it looks for an interesting year, put it that way, at the moment, both in Ecuador and in Georgia. And I have other places I'd like to see. So, I mean, I haven't written off other sites around the world I'd like to go to. I mean, I know I haven't got long, so I'll just quickly say, there's places in Egypt, underground and stuff that I would like to return to, that I visited when I was there. In Mexico, an old Mayan man told me of an entrance to a tunnel system under a Mayan temple there, which I had visited, which, all sorts of strange phenomena were happening at. And so, I mean, there are several sites which I'm hoping that the universe still wants me to go back to, and that's why I've been given, initial information about them. So I'm hoping that, yes, that in the next year or two, I may be expanding back towards Egypt and Mexico, as well as Georgia and Ecuador.
Well, and then you've got the Crespi collection that you may be able to get your hands on too.
I quite have, yes. I will say quick. I should say on that note, for people interested in artifacts in Ecuador, they're anomalous. Also look at the La Mana pieces, because that was some 200 and something pieces that were found in the jungle near La Mana, which is not too far from where I am now, and that those pieces are really radical. Some of them. Put it this way, I spoke to the guy who was in charge of that collection, and he said that of the pieces they displayed either online or publicly, something like about 60 pieces, and he said the rest of them were so controversial that his family is scared to show any of them, because they would have governments, churches, everybody on them, because they were so controversial. And you've got pieces there that are clearly, in my mind, Atlantean. They have symbols on them that even depict the basic structure of Atlantis, the concentric circled city, all sorts of things. So, I mean, I say look at La Mana as well as the Crespi collection and the site in the Yunganas, and you start to see a picture of an ancient Ecuador, which really doesn't fit into any narratives of history.
Excellent. Well, Bruce, I really thank you for your time tonight, and I know that it's just major hoopla going on there around you as you're trying to move, and I wish you the best, and you and Dani a safe move this week. Okay.
Thank you. And just apologies to the listeners. It's just the truck was meant to come many hours ago, and instead it arrived right when we had to start doing the interview. So I've had a bit of background.
Well, I'm going to give a real quick plug for next week's show. Aaron Judkins, our own Maverick, will be speaking with Klaus Dona live from Austria at the Klaus Dona Chronicles. So don't miss that. Check our schedule out on the Epic Voyagers website. And that will wrap it up for this evening.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.